Hello guys, I am Mayuri Goyal. I am here to represent on a presentation on clinical trials. So let us discuss about clinical trials in the upcoming slides. Introduction of the clinical trial. Clinical trials are scientific investigation that examine and evaluate safety and efficacy of different therapies in human subject. That is, clinical trials are basically conducted after the preclinical studies to evaluate the safety and efficacy of the drug. There are three important keywords in definition of clinical trials, that is experimental unit, in treatment, and the last one is evaluation. Let us discuss about these points in the upcoming slides. Three important keywords. Experimental unit. Experimental unit is basically referred to a targeted population for clinical studies, clinical trial. The intended population could be patients with certain diseases at certain stages or healthy human subject. The second one is treatment. Clinical trials are treatment can be placebo or any combination of a new pharmaceutical entity, that is drug, or any compound, a new diet, a surgical procedure, a diagnostic test, and a medical devices treatment. Last one is evaluation. Clinical trials should not only evaluate the effectiveness and safety of the treatment but also the assess quality of the life, impact on genetic factor, outcome researches associated with medical devices and treatment. So here's come the overview on the chart of FDA on clinical preclinicals overview. Preclinical testing on animals for toxicity, investigate new drug application, describe the manufacturer's plan for testing the drug in clinical trials. If approved by FDA, the manufacturer becomes the sponsor of an existing IND, that is investigating new drug. After that, phase 1 clinical trials were started. Clinical trials test for safety and dosing range. Number of patients in phase 1 clinical trials is very less as comparison to the phase 2 and phase 3 clinical trials. Um, ex, ex, Approximately 63.2% move to the phase 2 clinical trial. Phase 2. Clinical trials test for efficacy in the patient that the drug is intended to market. Number of patients are a few dozen to hundreds, approximately 30.7 move to phase 3 clinical trials. Phase 3 clinical trials. Clinical trials test for efficacy in the patient that the drug is intended to treat. Number of patients in phase 3 clinical trial is very high as comparison to phase 2 clinical trial. That is, in phase 3 clinical trials, approximately hundreds to 1000 patients are there. Approximately 58.1% move to the new drug application process. After that, review or approval process was started. A new drug application review once the drug has successfully completed the phase 3 clinical trials. The manufacturer generally submit a new drug application to FDA and approximately 85.3% are approved. If that is approved by FDA or deny approval for the drug or biologics for marketing and sales in the US. Phase 0 clinical trial. Phase 0 clinical trials are very essential or crucial. In phase 0 clinical trial, microdosing phase is there. Very low dose is given to see pharmacokinetics of the drug. Pharmacokinetics is basically a ADME, absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion of the drug. Avoid expensive phase 1 studies drug with unfit pharmacokinetics. Phase 0 clinical trial is basically very important or very crucial to avoid the expense of phase 1 clinical trials. A small number of healthy volunteers are used in phase 0 clinical trials. Phase 1 clinical trials. Here the drug is tried in normal human volunteers as the drug is not tested in the patient, so we cannot determine the efficacy in this phase. Efficacy is determined in phase 2 clinical trials. This is mainly toxicity and pharmacokinetic studies. Pharmacokinetic studies include ADME, absorption, distribution, metabolism and excretion. This is the first in human study. Number of the patient in phase 1 clinical trial is very less, that is 20 to 30 or 20 to 40, that's it. Length of the study is several months. So phase 2 clinical trials. We cannot determine both efficacy and safety in this phase. This is the first in patient study. The new drug tested at this stage in small number, that is 100 to 500 patients. In phase 2 clinical trial that is done approximately several months or 2 years up to. So in phase 3 clinical trials, we get to know about efficacy in the patient that the drug is intended to treat. Number of the patients in phase 3 clinical trials in 100 to thousands. Here the drug is tested in the large number of patients at several centers to include patients with different genetics group. This is done to specify the result of the study to variable genetics and ethnic group. If the drug is found to be harmless and effective in these trials, then one more application is filed with FDA, that is New Drug Application or NDA, to market the drug. If approval is settled, the drug is marketed. Phase 3 clinical trial is basically conduct or perform 1 to 4 years. These phase 3 clinical trial studies are done 1 to 4 years up to. Phase 4 clinical trials. In phase 4 clinical trial, that is post-marketing surveillance. Phase 4 clinical trial is performed after phase 3 clinical trials. Large number of patients being treated by practicing physicians to know infrequent and long-term adverse effects. Phase 3, Phase 4 clinical trial were conducted to know the long-term adverse effect. Special groups like children and pregnancy, women, etc. can be tested. Importance of clinical trials. The purpose of clinical trials is research. So the studies follow strict scientific standards. These standards protect patients and help produce reliable study results. Clinical trials are one of the final stages of the long and careful research process. The process often begins in laboratory where scientists first develop and test new ideas. If an approach seems promising, the next step may involve animal testing. These show how the approaches affect a living body and whether it's harmful. However, an approach that works well in the lab or animals doesn't always work well in the pupil. Thus, research in humans is needed. So, as I told you earlier, clinical trials is basically conduct to check the safety, effectiveness of the drug in patients. So as to know about the drug in the patient, these clinical trials are conducted. Thank you. Thank you so much for patience listening.